and welcome to Gamers Table, a discussion of tabletop role-playing games, war games, movies, books, and other related topics. Be warned, this show may contain some explicit material that may not be suitable for all audiences.
Hello, and welcome to Gamers Table. My name is Eric.
This is Mike.
This is Dan.
This is Mark.
And I'm Sean.
This episode, that was my swarmy voice, by the way.
Swarmy is not a word.
Smarmy.
I think smarmy.
No, it's, okay, we've had this discussion before.
It's not a discussion.
No,
Swarmy
it's a discussion.
is not a word.
That's the beauty of language. Words are made up all the time.
Making words up is what it is.
See, words are made up all the time. Think of sup. Sup was made up, and now it's a...
unfriend is now a word.
Unfriend, leet speak, things like that. It's all, it's all good. Okay, well, anyway.
There's swarthy and there's smarmy.
Yes, and mix those both together, and that's swarmy.
And that's what Eric just did.
And that's what I did.
Except that's not what you did.
And
that's what you claim to have done now that you know that swarmy isn't a word.
What's up? Sup. See? So anyway.
I'm going.
Actually, there is method to my madness because...
Yes, this can't possibly be our topic for tonight.
No, our topic is...
the origin of words.
No, it's indie games. What exactly is an indie game? And the reason I kind of brought that up about language and whatnot is I knew Mark's reaction. I knew exactly what Mark was going to do because that's the reaction he does when I say that word or when Woodside says that word. When people hear the word indie game, their knee-jerk reaction is yuck.
Hipster gamer.
Right. Their knee-jerk reaction is, I'm not going to like it because it's not mainstream, it's not what I know, it's not what I like.
Which is kind of like saying you like the top 40 stations on the radio.
Well, yeah.
When you think about it.
What it really gets down to, I think, because I used to be on a fence similar to this topic, is that people automatically believe if you are not quote-unquote mainstream, that somehow there's a lack of quality.
Right.
Or a lack of validity.
Right.
Because if you were good, you would be over here at Wizards of the Coast.
Right, exactly. And that's not necessarily true.
No, it is not the case.
And you just look at the music industry, for example.
That was the fence I was always on.
Yeah, and that's, if you look at that, for example, there's plenty of bands out there that have been successful for years that have never had mainstream, popularity.
Quote unquote, never been signed to, a major label or in this case, a major publisher.
And it's certainly not because they weren't given the opportunity to, but it's because artistically they chose that. And that actually plays into the whole philosophy of the indie game. The definition of an indie game, when you ask 10 people what's an indie game, you're going to get 10 different answers because there is no delineated definition of this is an indie game. For most people, it's something that's not by an accepted publisher. It's not a Wizards of the Coast or something like that. Others believe that an indie game is something that is solely owned and produced by one person. It's their intellectual property. They release it, and they are in charge of all of it.
I would probably,
people, I would imagine.
Yeah, I would lean probably towards that.
Because Alpha Omega, that's only a few guys.
Yes. Alpha Omega. That's a perfect example.
And a beautiful book.
Yeah, it's a beautiful book. The game itself is very complicated, but and that's kind of one of the things that separates some people's opinions of what is an indie game. The production value of a book. Some people would believe that Alpha Omega is not an indie book because of its level of production. It's only indie if you can only get it in PDF.
Right? Yeah, it's only indie if it's only done with stick figures.
Right. Yeah, no art to speak of and things like that. But that's not the case. I think for the purpose of what we're talking about, indie is any game that is produced by someone who retains the rights of that. They don't give it to a corporate think tank or a group of publisher committee and go, this is my manuscript of what I'm doing or what we are doing. Will you publish it? And they go through it and they say, okay, we'll do it with some revisions and we're going to change this, and this.
Right.
Or we're going to put our professional writers on it and we're going to change essentially everything that you've done.
Right. You could take a game like that, though. You could give Mike an indie game and a mainstream game. He could run them both, and somebody like me that doesn't buy the books plays them. I'm not going to tell the difference between a mainstream game and an indie game. I'm going to play it. I'm going to like it.
Exactly.
It's a game.
True.
That's how I see it.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So, and that's...
See, I like the point that Sean made.
Right.
It's a game.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter where it comes from.
Yeah.
And the point is to have fun doing it.
Sean's not buying it, though.
See, that's just
when
right.
They're side by side on a shelf, then it's different.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's in itself on a shelf. That's kind of an old school way of thinking anymore.
Is your game in a shop?
One of the best places to find any kind of game, mainstream or indie, is
DriveThruRPG.
It's DriveThruRPG or RPG Now, which incidentally is owned by the same company.
I was going to say their websites are like identical.
Right. And what that does is it sells PDFs. You can go on there and say you want to look up Shadowrun, and they have Shadowrun books that you can buy on PDF. And then also it's you may also like some of these other ones which are actually independent games. Some of them you can't tell the difference.
Right.
Because they're not on a shelf.
You never know.
But could you tell the difference in the price?
You could.
Because I think a mainstream game would cost, twice as much.
And you are correct. And a lot of
some indie games cost a lot too.
Some do.
Because the creator is dictating the cost.
How much the cost is.
You brought up RPG Now and DriveThruRPG, an indie game that happened whenever I purchased the Mutants and Masterminds Powers book.
Yes,
Ultimate Power.
Ultimate Power. That's how I found, and I showed you the rules for creating headquarters. That was an indie game. That was an indie faction making things for Mutants and Masterminds.
Yeah. Right. Green Ronin it's called the Mutants and Masterminds Superlink or something like that.
Yes, Superlink.
Superlink, which is almost like the open game license where they allow people to make third-party things with their stuff. And that Headquarters one is one of them. And I also believe, if I'm not mistaken, Lockdown was, or I don't know. I don't
think Lockdown was.
Lockdown may have been part of it.
That Headquarters book was really good.
Yeah.
It was really good.
So it's independent games. I think if you're interested in looking up some independent games, like what is there out there, there's a couple places you can go. Well, there's a lot of places you go, really. There's a place called The Forge that you can go to. It's a message board. It's mostly developers. And when you talk about independent games, you're going to find that everybody you talk to is a game designer, whether they are or not.
Guilty.
Right. But the thing is, the community itself, when it comes to the designers, everybody's bouncing ideas off of each other. They don't keep a whole lot of things sacred because they want people to enjoy what they're doing too. RPG Geek, which is a spin-off of Board Game Geek, which is a website that kind of it's like a nexus of role-playing game stuff.
It's a great website.
It is. It's an awesome website. And it keeps track of the community's perception of what's a good game. And they have a ranking system. So if you want to see what they have ranked as like the number one game,
I'm leery of stuff like that though.
Yeah, but I agree. I was going to make a point, but then I was like, no, I'm not going to bother because I just flat out agree.
Right. Yeah.
It's kind of like the Rotten Tomatoes effect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not really getting, the proper demographic of what it is. It's like you're getting the votes of the pajama people who sit around in their pajamas.
Well, and that's you're going to anytime you talk about the internet, that's what you're going to get.
Right.
And that's
the downside of indie games.
A very good point. I wonder how many people who play independent games are not members of a community like that.
Right.
I never even really thought about that because I was so focused on what's going on in the indie communities and things like that. I never stopped to think, who are these people?
Right.
So it's a lot of people drinking their own Kool-Aid.
Well, that's true too. That's true
and
too.
And insisting that their Kool-Aid is better than everybody else's Kool-Aid.
It has a tendency to happen online.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's the only real analog that I'm even remotely familiar with because I don't really join online communities. My buddy Paxton and my buddy John, they're both in the MERS. It's a band here in the Midwest.
An indie band?
Yeah, they've put out a couple CDs on their own. They haven't been signed by anybody. That's not the point. They are always going to Pitchfork. Pitchfork is a website that kind of keeps track of indie music. And they're always talking about, did you get a list of this on Pitchfork? Did you vote for this on Pitchfork? I was like, I've never been to the website.
Right.
But knowing what I know of those two guys, there's a lot of music out there that's great that only about 8 people listen to.
If the right people aren't endorsing it, even in a community like that, even in a website like that,
there's a buzzword, and it's my most hated word, like in the non-really English language. It's called tastemaker. I hate it, but they are very powerful people. Yeah. Especially like in the world of electronics and television, you get these. Think of like the Nielsen families are essentially tastemakers because they're kind of the ones dictating what's on TV.
Right.
So you have people who are members of these or like on Rotten Tomatoes. You have these people who, for whatever reason, this community carries weight. So they are then a tastemaker because it gets the names out there.
Right.
Same thing with
They're deciding what's cool.
Right. Exactly.
So it's almost the Beavis and Butthead effect.
Yes.
It's exactly the Beavis and Butthead effect.
Yeah. For those who don't know what we're talking about, when Beavis and Butthead was actually being aired new on MTV.
Yeah, not the remake.
Not the
originally.
remake. But originally they would have videos that the characters would comment on, and anything that Beavis and Butthead thought were cool would sell. And the things that they didn't like didn't sell. And that's
It's kind of like Casey Kasem way back in the day. If Casey Kasem played you, you were popular.
Right.
Right. And this is just part of communities. In communities, some people have more clout than others. They then become the tastemakers, and what they say gets pushed to the forefront.
Right. So that being said, everything has awards. You know what I mean? In indie games, they have their own indie game awards, which are the winner of indie game awards are presented at Gen Con. So I was like, well, what kind of games have actually won this? And it's actually been going around. Indie games have been going on. Indie game awards has been going on since 2002.
No idea.
Yeah. And the last two winners, I actually looked them up. They were last year's winner was a game called Apocalypse World, and Apocalypse World.
What's that about?
It's a post-apocalyptic game, but the thing about it is the thing that makes it kind of unique and what everybody oohs and ahs about is that is a no prep game.
A no prep game.
Yeah, the game master is expected not to have a preconceived story in mind.
Really?
It's very, very sandbox. You go in and you're living in this post-apocalyptic world, and the whole point is the game master is asking you questions. What do you do now? Well, what is that? Well, what's going on with this? What's going on with that? And allowing the players to develop the story on their own, just solely by asking questions, leading questions, but questions.
I'll +1 that.
Yeah,
I like that.
I think, and I knew you would. The first person I thought of when I read that was you. So I was like, okay, well, I can understand that. That's kind of an interesting concept and whatnot. But the game that won before that, the year before, was a game called Kagematsu, which is a GM-less game.
See, I was going to ask that. Why couldn't you create a game you don't need the GM and the characters push themselves?
Right.
Get the right players, you could do that.
I've seen that called a parlor game, kind of like how to host a murder mystery kind of thing. This is kind of the same way, except that it dictates two things. One character has to play the character who is a Ronin named Kagematsu, and that player has to be a female. The player has to be a female.
We would have some problems with that.
But it's a male character, at least as far as I could tell. I could be wrong, but
Sounds really bizarre.
And the men at the table, the players, have to court.
Oh wow!
What?
Yeah, that it's like
It's
one
an
set
RPG dating sim.
Yeah, that's exactly what it seemed like to me.
Indeed.
I see the underlying BS here.
Right.
We need to get a girl in our game group.
Right. So,
and be the center of attention.
And probably as no coincidence, it was written by a woman.
Well,
but I mean, it's indie games do that.
Different.
They don't. They can afford to be different, though. And that's almost like the standard now. You have these games that are
How different can you be?
how different can you be? How unique can you be?
what kind of new dice mechanic can I
New dice
come up
mechanics
with?
is very good because there are some games that have won in the past that are considered staples of indie games, and I'll go into that in a minute. But I wanted to mention this year's candidates for indie games of the year that's going to be announced at the Gen Con we're going to be at. So I kind of wanted to get everybody kind of interested, or at least know what what we're talking about. There's a whole list of them, but I only picked out a few of them that really caught my eye. One's called The Agency, and what that is, it's all the players take on roles as 1960s spies that go up against the supernatural, and it's set in London. So it's
We're all Bond.
well, you're all either Bond or even like the Avengers.
Right.
Not to like Thor and
Right.
We're talking like Mrs. Poole and
Exactly.
and, what's his name?
That other guy.
Steed.
Yes.
John Steed and Mrs. Poole.
Yes. That kind of genre. Next game I want to talk about is called Outrimmer.
That sounds
Sounds like a
sexual.
porn.
No.
Space opera.
It's an alternate history where the Crusade states, such as like Jerusalem, Damascus, and whatnot, they lasted until the 16th century.
Nice.
So it's Swashbuckler meets flying carpets and genies.
Oh, I'm totally up for that.
Yeah, it's Renaissance mixed with Alibaba and the 40
Give me a
Thieves.
flying carpet. Yeah.
I agree. And a rapier.
Yeah,
Yes.
so like musketeers riding flying carpets, things like that.
Well, this is what indie games do. Like it fills a niche that somebody wanted in their D&D game.
Right. Or just whatever game they're playing.
Yeah, whatever your
There's no mechanic
bread and
for it.
butter
Or I mean,